She told me a story about being on the phone with a 17-year-old boy who lives in eastern Ukraine and was considering leaving to go to government-controlled Ukraine. At 17, his formative years of schooling had been learning a Russian curriculum, but he maintained his Ukrainian identity and tried to learn Ukrainian in secret. He knew that every passing day, it became more likely that he'd receive a Russian draft notice. He told my colleague that he was worried about moving to government-controlled Ukraine, though, because he didn't think that they would sell him bread. "What do you mean?" she responded. "Why wouldn't they sell you bread?" And he said, "Well, I've been practicing my Ukrainian, but it's not perfect, and they told us that in Ukraine, if you speak Russian, they won't sell you bread." I think this story is instructive for two reasons. First, we're about to discuss how Russia has developed a truly impressive, comprehensive, tech-enabled repressive apparatus on the occupied territories over the past 14 years. And it's also true that Russia has capabilities that allow it to monitor and punish Ukrainians on the individual level. And yet, there are still many people, even those who have never experienced the freedom of living in government-controlled Ukraine, who are holding out hope, trying to escape, or resisting in big ways, big and small. On the other hand, as Russia's war drags on and the occupation of eastern Ukraine and Crimea deepens, the likelihood that Ukrainians on the occupied territories will seek out outside information and understand that there is an alternative to Russian oppression shrinks. Russia's re-education and propaganda efforts are so advanced that even this boy, who has taught himself Ukrainian and sought out information about how to leave, is worried about not being able to buy bread in Ukraine. Had things gone differently, this same boy may well have become a soldier in the Russian army, sent to the front lines, and commanded to take up arms against his country. It sometimes seems difficult for Americans to understand the urgency Ukrainians feel about defeating Russia fully, liberating the occupied territories, and ensuring that Russia is unable to fight further wars. However, as we'll hear from this esteemed panel of experts over the next hour, the situation on the occupied territories is not static. Russia is getting better and better at quashing opposition and re-engineering the Ukrainians under its rule in service of its genocidal war. And if we act before it's too late, there are steps that we can take to support Ukrainians like the 17-year-old boy who wish to see their country whole, their people free, and their region at peace. So first, we'll hear from Rena Adam, who will give us an overview of how Russia's capabilities have evolved over the past decade and a half. Rena is a research associate at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. She has years of experience working on information warfare, including at the Center for Strategic Communications and Information Security under the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine. Next, we'll hear from Maksym Beskhmelnytsyn, an analyst at the Jamestown Foundation and associate fellow at GlobeSec. Maksym is a strategic policy specialist and prolific researcher and writer on all things Russian military, European security, and hybrid warfare. Maksym will zoom in further on how Russia has combined violence and digital isolation in its efforts to control the Ukrainian population under its rule. And last, but certainly not least, we'll hear from Stephen Feldstein, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in the Democracy, Conflict, and Governance program. Steve is an expert on tech authoritarianism and digital technology's impact on war, and has looked at these challenges from both inside and out of government, including as a Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor Bureau of the Department of State. He is the author of The Rise of Digital Oppression, How Technology is Reshaping Power, Politics, and Resistance, and the forthcoming book, Bytes and Bullets, Global Rivalry, Private Tech, and the Shape of Modern Warfare. He'll take us through the strategic implications of Russia's growing tech authoritarian apparatus, and perhaps give us a sense of what we can do about it. Rena.
So one of the key dangers of Russia's war against Ukraine and their current approach to war is their integration of physical strikes alongside with territory annexation and the attacks in the information environment, followed with control over information on temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, or the TOT. Not so long ago, President Putin signed a decree outlining Russia's national policy strategies through 2036, which is built around the idea of Russia existing as this kind of state of civilization. One of the main goals is very ambitious. By 2036, the Kremlin wants over 95% of its population to self-identify as Russian. This poses kind of a problem for them, specifically on Ukraine's TOT. As to achieve that, they need to launch massive propaganda programs in Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, which are all essentially designed to erase the said Ukrainian identity and establish the identity as a Russian. One of their first and most fundamental tools in this is the information blockade. We now have reports of Russian authorities checking residents' phones on temporarily occupied territories, blocking internet access, or completely limiting access to Ukrainian and Western media outlets. Internet access being frequently cut off, especially when it comes to access to Ukrainian and Western media outlets, creates kind of a gap that needs to be filled in, and it's usually filled in by Russia's own information ecosystem. Since 2023, Russian-controlled Telegram channels, television channels, radio stations, and news websites have been operating nonstop in the occupied territories. They're broadcasting messages that include aggressive disinformation narratives, that include a lot of anti-Ukrainian narratives, glorify the Russian war effort, and also glorify the alleged rebuilding. The residents were even given free connections to a package of television channels called Ruskiy Mir, or the Russian World, which is a very good name for kind of the ideology that these channels promote. Besides blocking the information, Russia is also actively flooding the information space with their own narratives and messages. Last year, in our joint investigation with our Ukrainian partner Open Minds, we have discovered over 3,600 Telegram channels that have sent over 300,000 comments on Telegram between January 2024 and April 2025, which were specifically targeting Ukrainian populations in the TOT, with some of the individual channels posting as many as 1,300 comments in a day, which amounts to kind of a comment every 36 seconds, indicating for bot activity. These bots crafted tailored messages for occupied territory audiences, differentiating their content from the ones aimed at audiences inside Ukraine and Russia. And their comments fell into kind of three broad categories: very pro-Russian, very pro-Ukrainian, and the kind of more neutral ones, which were just generically calling for peace, but were also trying to allege that Russia is the reasonable party in this conflict. Pro-Russian propaganda was promoted twice as often on temporarily occupied territories by these channels than in any other kind of audiences that they have been active in, so they were not promoting pro-Russian narratives quite as often within kind of communities that were aimed more at Ukrainian and Russian audiences directly. Their themes ranged from praise of local infrastructure repairs, Russian social services, to very active attacks against President Zelensky specifically,